Center in Atlanta. And so I thank you for your patience with me as I get rid of these jitters that I'm feeling about presenting some important work that I've been doing for quite some time. I just got off a call with another group of people that I've been working with for the last 2 years to talk about emotional healing relevant to trauma. And we've been using the book by Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands, where in this group for the last 2 years, I've been working with European Americans and African Americans and persons of color to talk about their cultural trauma and how it impacts one's life and relationship. But today, because this is still Black History Month, I'm going to focus primarily on the African American community and the healing work. So no offense to anyone else, but this is some work that needs to be done, as well as other work relevant to relational healing caused by trauma. I'm getting ready to share my screen with you, and we'll go from there. So the title of this presentation, I was talking to Melissa about what we could talk about, what could be presented. And I was telling her about this training that I received several years ago through the Association of Black Psychologists, the National Association of Black Psychologists, called Emotional Emancipation. And I thought this was appropriate for what she told me she wanted to offer to the members of the Synod and persons beyond, where we will talk about historical trauma and the healing that's necessary specifically for African Americans. And so this presentation is about that kind of work. Again, I welcome you here to this opportunity during Black History Month so that we can talk about the legacy of African Americans and how we got to the place where there's need for healing and what kind of healing that's necessary for our community. Again, it's through the Association of Black Psychologists and with Community Healing Network that emotional emancipations have been formed all over this country and beyond. We have circles and on the continent of Africa, we have circles in England, circles all over, where persons like myself have been trained to be facilitators so that we can bring these healing circles to people who want to be healed. You'll hear me ask the question, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be whole? And so the question is that something that we want to do? We know that it's necessary for our wholeness. And so the Association of Black Psychologists have created these circles, this format of circles, and I'll go into some more details about what that is to answer the question and to respond to the question, how do we get our healing? Do we want to be whole? And to say that no one else is going to be responsible for our healing but ourselves. So these emotional emancipation circles are ways where African Americans can do our own healing work, not depending on someone else to do the work for us. So what these circles do is to address what's called historical traumas. I'm sure if you've been born in this country or beyond this country, you know that there's been some experiences specific to the African American community that has caused some angst in our being and in our relationships. I and others call it historical trauma that needs to be addressed. And what happened to us Because that's when we oftentimes when we think about trauma, or we think about trauma, we often don't realize if something has happened to us to cause that trauma. I'll go into a little bit more details about what has happened to us, but some of you already know. And that's what the emotional emancipation circles do. It reminds us about what has happened to us, those jagged stones and fragmented remnants of a past that has created angst within our being, where sometimes we can't show up being fully who we are. We put on a mask to show up to be in relationship with others, and even put on a mask so that we don't even look at ourselves. So what is this trauma? It's called the Great Ma'afa. But before I go there, this is a question I ask all of my students in my class. Do we have a soul, or are we a soul? And so how you answer that question too will help you understand what I mean about soul trauma. Are we a soul, or do we have a soul? You don't have to answer it. We can go on, because I want to make certain I get through this and have more than enough time to engage in conversation, because that's how I like to teach and to engage persons, is to engage in conversation. We'll get back to that question of the soul and how we define the soul. But something has happened to us that has caused trauma to our soul. And trauma to our soul trauma is defined as when the prevailing societal forces interrupt, diminish, or destroy the soul of an individual or a person. And again, it goes back to the question, do we have a soul, or are we a soul? Soul trauma is a perpetuation of the assault on the soul. There's different ways of understanding soul, as I said before. And from the work that I've been doing around trauma, soul trauma in particular, I take a particular stance on that question that I raise with my students. And I take a particular cultural understanding of the soul, where I suggest that the soul is made up of a lot of different parts. Your name, your personality, your spirit, the shadow side of you that you don't want anyone to know about, your heart. I say that's the soul. And so what happens when your name, your identity, your experience is not recognized? What happens when your personality, everything that makes you unique, is questioned? What happens when the vital part of yourself, your ka, that distinguishes between whether or not you're alive or not, when you struggle between living and dying, when you can't breathe, what happens when someone takes that from you? What happens when the shadow side of you, your sheot, which represents something of the person that you, again, you don't want anyone to know about, but it's still there. And you can't fully be yourself. What happens? And what happens when your heart, the seat of your emotions, your thoughts, your will, and your intentions are compromised? That's soul trauma. When your name, your identity, your personality, your spirit, that shadow side, your heart, those parts of making you whole are subject to hurt and pain. So what the emotional emancipation circles do, and is to present what's called the emotional emancipation keys. And there are 7 keys. And these keys are affirmations of the work that's required to free ourselves from the psychological and emotional bondage of centuries of racism. The Great Ma'afa. The keys provide conscious reminders of what we must understand, what we must tell ourselves, what we must seek out, and what we must do in order to free ourselves. And these keys can serve as a source of support in moments of stress, challenge, strain, and whenever we are at risk of slipping into old habits, outdated thinking, and unhelpful patterns that get in the way of us being truly who God has created us to be. Black psychologists have talked about conceptual incarceration, when the concepts that we've embraced keep us from being free. And then what happens with these concepts about who we are, it keeps us comfortable in captivity. And so emotional emancipation circles help us to be free from this incarceration and help us to recognize that being comfortable in captivity does not serve us well. So the 7 keys to emotional emancipation: we recognize that as children of divine force, our power, personality, and communal is boundless. We recognize that the history of our people started long before the horror of our enslavement. We understand that who we are and what we do reflect African cultural wisdom. We know that character and choices can limit or build community and our relationships with each other. We take responsibility for managing our emotions, thoughts, and actions. And we believe that the collective, the community, is the basis for what is good, normal, and right about us. We are therefore empowered knowing that our strength comes from our spirituality, and our spirituality is connected to one another. These are the 7 keys that we're saying will help us to free ourselves emotionally. You heard me use the term Ma'afa. Some of you already know what that is. It's the transatlantic slave trade that has caused what some people call post-traumatic slave syndrome. One theologian, Dr. Lee Butler, says it's not just post-traumatic, but it's protracted. What happened to us because of the Ma'afa, because of the slave trade that separated families from family members, children from their parents, has caused that trauma. Again, remember the soul, the identity. Who were we? One of the questions I ask my students is, who were you before someone told you who you were? Who were you? What was your culture? What were the things that you valued before someone told you who you were? And so because of this Ma'afa, we as a community experience this trauma. And this trauma is a byproduct of the post-traumatic slave syndrome. As the Association of Black Psychologists have surmised, there is a need for this healing work because we've been taught a lie about who we are. Society has created a story for us. And unfortunately, sometimes we buy into that story and we don't even recognize that. Last year was the 100th anniversary of what? Was it the Tulsa riot or the Tulsa massacre? It's how it's framed, how it's been conceptualized. When you think about a riot, you think of somebody getting upset and fighting like crazy. But if it's framed as it was, as a massacre, where Black folks were killed, a whole city was destroyed, a Black community was destroyed, that's a different story. And someone has created those stories for us. And this is just one example. There's so many others of the stories that we've been told. For example, why did Rosa Parks go to Montgomery? It wasn't just to integrate the city buses. It was because Black women were being raped. And she was investigating that. The stories that have been told to us. And so what the Association of Black Psychologists are saying, that we got to heal ourselves and defy the lies that have been told. That means we have to relearn our history and find ways to affirm who we are. Hold this question for later. What are some of the lies we have been told about African-American folk? I'll give you some examples, or we can go back later and ask this. Black people are, Black people can't, Black people will never be, white people are, white people can't, white people will never be. What are the lies we've been told? And how have these lies spread? And how have these lies affected who we are and how we feel about ourselves? Or do we feel at all? And so when we have these circles, we not only talk about the lies, but we also turn around and say, what's the truth that defies the lie? So for example, if the lie is Black people are lazy, we defy it by saying our ancestors worked as slaves from sundown to sunset. Who literally built this country? The lie that we are uneducated? No, Timbuktu. Whole history, whole legacy of educated African folk. The lie that Black people can't work together? Pan-African events. So we defy the lie by telling truths. So I'm gonna go to the first, and Melissa, remind me of the timing, because I can get wordy, and I won't tell you how many pages this PowerPoint is. So remind me of the timing of this.
Okay.
So, okay. So the first key, and I'm going to go through maybe one or two of the keys, and I'll so that you can get a sense of what the emotional emancipation circles do, what we do, and I'll even give you an outline or tell you an outline of how the 7 sessions, you can do it once a month, where for 7 months you take one of the keys and you work on that. Or you can do it over 7 weeks. But the first key is this: as children of a divine force, our power, both personal and communal power, is boundless. Our spirituality is important and it gives us power. And that power is boundless. Imagine if we embrace that fully. One of the, I don't know how many of you like, was watching the mini, it wasn't a mini series, but the show Queen Sugar. I love that show. And so, you know, in some of my work, I write about ambiguous loss and how African Americans have always lived with ambiguity, because oftentimes we want to believe in the certainty of how things are, but no, we live with ambiguity, and that's okay. And so I use the theme song from Queen Sugar, where in the lyrics are keep the color in the line, keep the color in the line. Dreams never die, keep the color in the line. Take flight. As the world turns, keep the color in the line. Dreams never die, take flight. And I use that to say that society wants us to color within the lines. And oftentimes we try to do that. We want to stay in the line so we don't make any waves, but still we have dreams. And if we know some of the ways that we've been able to sustain ourselves, we know the story of when the people could fly. So take flight. And remember that dreams never die. But oftentimes we want to keep coloring within the lines because we've been taught that. We've been socialized in that way of thinking. So taking that, we want to defy that lie and remember a time when we could dream, we will dream again, and we could take flight. What has happened to us is that we've been dismembered to a certain degree by a variety of reasons. And so, you know, this one of this pieces is a cover of an album that was produced by Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands. And he shows how how African-American folk have been dismembered and unarmed, you know. And Resmaa lives in Minnesota. So this was during the time of George Floyd and the whole movement toward getting rid of the police department. And that's another workshop. But often when I teach about trauma and trauma healing, I often use this vase, this picture of the vase. And so in Asian culture, for some Asian cultures, I don't want to be monolithic in that when something is broken, like a vase, they use gold to heal or to put back together, to remember, put back together that which was broken. And what is created is something more beautiful. And so that's what we're hoping to do with emotional emancipation circles, is to recognize that we've been dismembered for a variety of reasons and find ways to be remembered. So if dismemberment is pulling the body apart, remembering is putting the body back together again. And in this remembering, we become a part of the rhythm of our passed on ancestors. Imagine being part of those who have gone before us and being what and who they dreamt for us. So in the remembering, again, this is part of emotional emancipation. We remember that we come from good stuff. And we know that we are closer to each other than we realize. And in order to be in relationship with each other, we all need to work on our healing. So this is the question that I've raised from the beginning. Do we want to be well? The quote comes from the book by Toni Cade Bambara, the book, The Salt Eaters, when she asked the question and she makes a statement. Do you want to be well? Because wholeness ain't no trifling thing. It takes a lot of work if you want to be well. So the question is, do we want to be well? Do we want to engage in the work of healing? Because this work of healing, it's ongoing. Once we can contain the fallout of one-ism, we will come face to face with the impact of another. Something's gonna happen. But the good news is that we can survive because we are not absolute trauma. We have coping and life-affirming modalities that generations have created. And so that's what we have to claim. Some of those modalities of healing that we've forgotten, that's going to help us with our healing. So going back again to key number one. As children of a divine force, our power, personal and communal, is boundless. The awakenness of that is I awaken to the reality of my unquestionable worth, and that something all-knowing, someone all-knowing, all-powerful, almighty is always with me, because I'm a child of a divine force, and my power is boundless. Imagine if you can embrace that. And so in the circles, we go over that, we talk about that, and we use resources from others, such as Marcus Garvey here, who says, God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our creative genius, we made ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law. Let the sky and God be our limit, and eternity our measurement. So our power is boundless. And we may use another quote by here, Zora Neale Hurston. Love this. Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? Imagine if you could feel that good about yourself and not have to put on a mask and not have to compromise who you are in order to be in relationship with someone else. I say that this work of emotional emancipation is what I call a Sankofa move. And that meaning of Sankofa, it is not too taboo to fetch which is at risk of being left behind. In the Akan tradition in Ghana, there's a belief that wisdom is learned from the past. The past serves as a guide for planning. Knowledge is based on critical examination and intelligent and patient investigation. And so in these circles too, we engage in this investigation. To invoke Sankofa is to analyze those forces that control the story of one's being. Remember, we've been told lies, so we need to examine it. And we need to ask ourselves, is this story life-giving and authentic, or does it serve a particular purpose to keep things status quo? And so what we do is explore the forces that control and perhaps continue to control one's being. This is where key number 2 comes in, that history is important. And the truth of the lie that we sometimes embrace, we're thinking that, particularly here in the Americas, that our history started. And I'm not saying everyone, because some other people know the truth. But also, some people believe that our history started with slavery. And so this key that is explored is the truth that the history of our people started long before the horror of our enslavement. And so we take the time to explore that. We may show a film to show who we are, again, before someone told us who we were, and the history of our people. Yeah, remember I told you the people could fly. So, using literature, using movies, using whatever is necessary to remind us of our power and our potential, and the history of who we be. I'm going to use my Brooklyn vernacular. So in these emotional emancipation circles, again, the 7 keys, one of the 7 keys is emphasized, and we begin each session and end each session with a mindful exercise. There's an affirmation of who we are and the reminder of the key. There's a description of the key, and we focus on it for that week or that month, however you do the circles. There's awareness and the statement of awareness. There's a quote of video. Remember, I showed you, a quote or two. And then we get into small groups, where in the small groups, you have some conversation and some discussion. There also would be a short didactic, someone who's leading, who's been trained to do these circles. And I have a sister who just moved from North Carolina to Savannah, who she and I trained together. And so hopefully here in the Southeastern Synod, we could collectively do some training in your congregations, or even, and I saw Bishop of South Carolina Synod, maybe you can come to South Carolina, it's not too far, where we can do this training, the two of us can do this training for your congregations or your communities. And so we do a short didactic, and then we have a closing ritual, a song, a dance, and yes, we dance, and we close out the evening with, or the afternoon, whatever it is, with a mindfulness exercise. And so that's the rhythm and the flow of these circles that helps with our healing. And it helps with our sense of identity, our racial identity development. Sometimes we need to prop that up. Who are we? Before someone told us who we were. We hear a lot about reparation, and I know this week we're, I think it's starting tonight, and then on next part of next week with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor conference, they're talking about reparation. And reparation, and with the definition, is that of remembering, repair, restore, and replenish. And so that's what emotional emancipation circles do. It helps us to remember, it helps us to repair or to heal. It helps us to be restored and be replenished, so that we can be in relationship with God, God's people, and with ourselves. So why do we need this healing? As much as some of you know, I do not like Minnesota. I shouldn't say that out loud, but I don't like Minnesota. But there's some good things about Minnesota. And so there was a conference with, trying to remember the school, and there's some sisters and brothers who did a conference on education and the African-American experience. And one brother talked about telomeres, and I had never heard about telomeres. And telomeres are parts of the chromosome, so it's the end part of the chromosome. And what this brother talked about was that one could tell how long one's life could be by the length of the telomeres. And in the research that they're doing, and again, they were talking about education, is that when there was trauma, when there was particularly racial trauma, the telomeres would be shortened. And that meant that your life would be shortened. What they discovered was, and they were working with children, is that once there was some healing work, with the children around these injustices, the telomeres would grow back, and so that life would be prolonged a little bit longer. But we know there's other factors too. But we also know that the healing work is necessary for our life and for us to have long life and a life that's worth living. Melissa, am I getting close on time?
Yeah, you have about 5 or 6 more minutes.
Okay, cool. Okay. So healing is necessary. I mentioned this book by Dr. Lee Butler, where he talks about protracted, instead of post-traumatic slave syndrome, he talks about protracted slave syndrome, where he talks about the need for us to liberate our dignity and save our souls. And what he talks about is the move, and this is, as it relates to the emotional emancipation, is that we move from emotional development, but I do think that we have to do some emotional development work, to relational development, from this existential longing for something better, to the search. So longing is one way of being, but imagine if you're diligently searching for your healing. Moving from learning the rules to living the paradox. Again, I talk about ambiguous laws and the fact that we've always lived with paradox and ambiguity. Imagine if we don't get so caught up, and it has to be this way, but embrace the idea that we live with paradox, and moving from identity and play to identity and work, and working on our own healing. And moving from rage to creativity. How can we use our creative being to create the communities that we want? One of the pieces, and I didn't put it in this presentation, and I've been talking, I mentioned this to Melissa, is about the abolitionist movement that's happening, an abolitionist sanctuary, where we are creative and responding to questions such as, why are African Americans incarcerated? How can we do things differently? And so to set up some educational opportunities and being creative in a response that we're not depending on someone else to give us the solutions for. We have within us that creativity. Invoking Sankofa, claiming our knowledge in one's ancestry and oneself. And the third key, and I'm just going to briefly go over the other 4 keys. The third key is who we are and what we do reflect African cultural wisdom. So we're going to have to go back, that Sankofa move, go back and claim some of those wisdoms that was denied to our knowing. A journey toward a mother's self of potential wholeness. Take that journey where we engage in ma'at, creative justice work, restoration, to assist with ma'afa, termination. So the 4 last keys are these: character and choices can limit or build community in our relationships with each other. We have responsibility for managing emotions, thoughts, and actions. We believe that the collective, the community, is the basis for what is good, normal, and right about us. And we are empowered knowing that our strength comes from our spirituality and our spiritual connection to one another. So we go through those keys, one by one, exploring them and sharing one's emotion, so that we can be about the business of our healing and being creative and responding, not just for ourselves, but for the community. I called emotional emancipation also, and there are theologians who talk about this redemptive socialization. How can we redeem ourselves? By socializing ourselves to defy the lie and tell the truth and know the truth for the sake of our healing. I'm going to end there. But I would say that often what we would do in the circle too is that we would end with, again, a ritual of healing, remembering, and part of that is remembering what is dark and ancient and divine within oneself that aids our speaking, and close with a circle. And so if you get a chance, I'm not going to play it here because I want us to have some conversation, a song about dreaming. What would that look like if we had the freedom to dream and to be fully who we were, not caught up in someone else's conceptualization of who we are supposed to be, but we engage in our own emotional healing and freedom work. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. So I think I'll open it up now for questions. So you can use the reaction emoji and raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and jump in with a question.
I know I said a lot, so let's just be in conversation with each other. I may not have all the answers, but I can offer some.
So Dr. Wallace, I'll begin. I think it's probably maybe a little off topic, but maybe on topic. I often hear, probably more recent, about receiving culturally responsive mental health treatment from providers that get it. And so how would a person determine what are those qualities of someone that is a responsive provider if they're looking for that mental health treatment? Can you answer that?
I'll try to answer that. I can just tell you about my education as a mental health specialist at the University of Minnesota. And I'll use an example. So one of the classes that was required in my program, my PhD program, was that of gender, understanding gender. What was not required was a course on culture. So you have persons who have not been exposed to or taking courses or have a knowledge of what are some of the cultural nuances that one needs to consider about the history of persons, communities, whether they're African-American, African, Asian, Latinx communities. And so, so there is a need for persons to seek out and question. I mean, you're going to a person, you're asking them you're spending money with them. So you want to be able to ask them questions about their background. What do they know? What's their experience? How have they been trained? And then you decide what's comfortable for you. I know that when I was doing some work in Minnesota last year, there were even some African Americans who didn't want to see me as a therapist. And I believe part of it was because I was getting too close their pain. And so it depends on where persons are as to whether or not they're wanting someone who's going to look like them, know their background, and provide the support and the listening ear and the therapeutic techniques that's going to get them to their where they believe their healing is needed.
Thank you. And along the same lines, despite progress over the many years, there's still what I would say a significant amount of stigma associated with mental health, and especially in the Black community. And so, do you have any thoughts about how we go about remedying that, or embracing the fact that, you know, seeking help for our mental health is just as important as our physical health?
Yeah, and I think it's what you're doing is offering opportunities and workshops, and specifically, you know, yes, this is Black History Month, and so maybe the focus this month is for that, but then have other opportunities that are specific because our communities, they need the work. I mean, because of the what Lee Butler calls the protracted slave what's happening with that, what has happened to us, it's still there. And so being proactive and being creative in finding ways to expose people to hopefully the richness of programs like emotional emancipation, so that communities, youth, adults can do their own healing work. I know, and this is well, no, it's not. So I just finished up a course on human sexuality and seminary. Many African Americans may not want to talk about sex and sexuality, but for purposes of relationships, we've got to have those conversations and do it in a way that is culturally relevant to our, that's going to bring about healing to our community. Because again, I'll just say this, even in sacred texts, some of them, the interpretation has been misconstrued that is not necessarily helpful for our community. I think, Barbara?
Yeah, I wanted to ask where this modality is available for, if you wanted to refer people to this healing system.
You can go to the website, you can look it up, Google Emotional Emancipation. Like I said here, I'm a facilitator. I've been trained in this modality, and I have another sister friend who's going to be in Savannah. She's going back and forth right now, but you can get some facilitators to come and work with your congregational communities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Christopher John Paul.
Hi, good afternoon. So as we're starting to see smaller communities begin to organize actions of reparation, like city councils, et cetera, there's obviously a lot of room for that to happen in the church, and we're starting to see those conversations even happen. I think calls for churchwide to begin to take denominational action towards reparation. What might that look like for individual congregations or churches? Or have you seen examples of it done well, and also maybe examples where it's been done poorly?
I have not seen it. I have not been paying attention to it. I just know that there's different definitions of reparation and what does it mean. And so doing the research is going to be necessary so that we won't perpetuate more harm to ourselves by not understanding fully fully as full as possible what that means. And so, just to say we're going to do reparation because, again, that may have a particular meaning for one group of people or an individual that means something quite different from those who have done the research. Like I said, this week, starting tonight, with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, and it's a gathering of researchers, clergy persons, activists who have done the work. They're going to be having lots of conversations around reparation. So just because it's, someone says this is what reparation looks like, I say, do the research so we don't get caught up in perpetuating something that may not necessarily be helpful in the long haul for our communities. I don't know if that helps in responding.
It does. It does. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. You're quiet. Why is this? Come on, we're family here. I think. So let me ask you this. What does emotional emancipation look like for y'all? For you? Or I'll go to my question. Do you want to be healed? What does that look like? What does healing look like?
I'll speak to that. I'm part of an organization called Reevaluation Counseling, and we do a lot of liberation work in all different areas. And we're working on ending classism because that's kind of holds all the oppressions together in capitalism. And I'm just so aware of the importance of all of us learning as much as we can about the true history. And so we're not living in the fantasy land that I grew up about how things are organized in the world, and also the internalized oppression that comes from not knowing reality, so that you end up hurting yourself. And that works for women's oppression, African heritage oppression, gay liberation, all those kind of things. That all it's all the oppressions are intertwined. So I thought this sounds like a really good structure for getting to the truth of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. And Barbara, where are you located?
I'm in Atlanta, Redeemer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Redeemer. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Toki Huff, and I'm in Atlanta. I'm with Lutheran Church of Atonement. And many of us have seen all the killings towards Black men, especially like with George Floyd. And my question is, what would healing look like for the young lady that took the video? If I were the young lady that took the video of George Floyd, what would that look like for me? And in the sense that I'm saying it for me, many of us have watched the videos over and over again. So what would that healing look like for us?
So you've been traumatized. We've all been traumatized, because of being able to witness that murder. It would begin by acknowledging the fact that you have been traumatized. And often, because part of my work is on grief and loss, one of the things I would say is, how did that traumatization, that experience of grief, because I'm sure you experience grief, how has that connected with other experience of your own personal grief and loss? What did it remind you of? What dreams do you have for our community that you are grieving, that this experience have shown up and living color for the world to see? How has that impacted you? So beginning that work of acknowledging that pain and that hurt is the beginning of the healing. And as I said, the healing is going to take some time because this is, I mean, one of many. And this is one that we've seen. There are others that we have not seen.
And that was why I was asking the question, because it continuously repeats itself.
Yes.
Over and over again.
Yes.
So how do you heal when it's a constant? It is coming at you so fast that you can't.
Again, you being conversation.
Swallow.
Yeah. Yes. And you can't breathe. And it impacts your body. Like I said, the group that I'm working with in North Carolina, we've been meeting for 2 years. We've been meeting for 2 years to talk about how trauma, how racial trauma has impacted our bodies. We meet first together, then we meet separately. So white bodies meet in one group, bodies of color or bodies of culture, as Resman calls it, we meet in another group to talk about it, to process it, because oftentimes we don't make the time or the space to process those emotions and what it does to our body. So, and again, oftentimes we think that it's supposed to end right away. I mean, how many years has it been here in this country? Over 400 years. And so what do we do with that? So we have to find safe spaces where we can talk about it. And the healing, and I'm not going to say the healing is ongoing. The healing comes opportunity to talk about it. And then, as I said, be creative in your response. So what would atonement do to address what's happening in that community relevant to the killing of Black boys and Black girls? One of the courses that I'm going to be teaching starting Ash Wednesday is Missional Church through the lens of George Floyd Square. So there's a whole community called George Floyd Square. And people are responding in different ways because their reaction, some of them live there, some of them have witnessed, like the young girl. She witnessed what happened. So the question is, what is the church's response? What does a missional church look like in response to some of what's continuing to happen in our communities? That's where the abolitionist sanctuaries come in, where you will get education around how your congregation, first an assessment about what is your congregation doing to be an abolitionist, and then find ways and get education and training on how to do that freedom work. So we can talk about it, but then and process it because the emotional work is necessary. But then part of the healing is being creative and being active.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a concern, several. I'm concerned about the current climate of eliminating critical race theory, watering down historical facts regarding race issues, not being able to discuss race issues that might upset white children. Also in Alabama, they're changing district lines to suppress the voting of Blacks. How can people stand up against these kinds of things?
Whew. And the sister here is down the hall here at Chase Valley asking that question in the church where the father of this Denise McNair was a member. And if you don't know who Denise McNair is, please look her up. Okay. So it's a lot of work. And so let me tell you what I'm doing here at Shays Valley is to get people comfortable with me so that we can begin to have those conversations. Because not everyone's ready to hear that, to hear a truth that critical race theory is not being taught in our schools. It's a law, theory. But if you're holding on to it, and this is, part of a conversation I had over lunch, if you're holding on to this is how it is, and I don't want to hear anything else, I also believe there's something underneath that. And I think particularly here in Alabama is the legacy of the state or the city called Birmingham. Imagine if you grew up the entire life in Birmingham, AKA Birmingham. How might you feel? When and where have you processed those emotions? And so that's what Resmaa talks about, Resmaa Menakem, when he talks about racial trauma, he's not talking about Black people, not just Black people's trauma, but white people's trauma. Because white people have been traumatized too. And many don't even recognize that. And so then this is how things are. It's going to be that way because I don't want to look at what has happened. I don't want to be associated with that kind of experience that have killed 4 little girls. So I don't know if I answered your question, but we got work to do. Southeastern Synod, y'all got work to do. See, I'm still rostered in North Carolina.
My name is Marilyn Lee, and I'm from the Lutheran Church of the Atonement. And I'm here just what she said. Everybody's afraid to talk about this critical race theory. And it's not really, I'm just thinking that people are afraid. And they're afraid because they don't want to face the reality. We have to face the reality every day. I'm trying to say this is a part of history. It happened. Let's get over it. We got to face it. We got to move on. But everybody who I think is afraid to face it might be because my children are now out here friends with other children. And if we go into this critical race theory where the kids start to ask questions and want to know, well, why did they do this? And then they come home and may ask the parents. When they come home and ask their parents, it may go back a couple of generations. And some people may not want to face the fact that this is something that we didn't do and your grandfather didn't do, but your great-great-grandfather and your great-great-great-grandfather were all in this. It's almost like the thing about trying to put on a mask because you want to save yourself and you want to save other people in society. And I hate to have to go here, but you make a big issue about the mask. I can't breathe. It rubs my nose. It does this. But when the Klan was wearing a hood that was over the whole head now, a hood and a robe, it wasn't a problem then when people were being lynched. I don't understand it. I don't even know if they would understand it if you had to make them face that issue either, because a lot of them don't want to face the issue. Everybody that's here right now understands what's going on, wants to see if they can come up with some kind of solution to this. We can't come up with the solution. We can put things in place until the real people out there face up to it. Legislators don't want to face up to it. I got my constituents over here, so I want to make sure I don't make them mad because I want to get back into office or whatever the case might be. So until we stop and do something, and I'm talking about that's everybody. It just can't start with one person. It just can't start with blacks. It can't start with whites. It can't start with the middle class. It can't. Everybody has got to play a part. My grandchildren are in South Carolina right now, and they went to the park yesterday, and they were outside playing. They had a mask on, and these kids came up to them and asked, "Well, why do you have on a mask?" And so my daughter's mother-in-law said that Max told them because we don't want to catch germs and get sick. And so I didn't ask her anything else because I just figured that the kids, because one thing about children, they are very innocent. They don't care about what situation. They're going to ask the question and they want to answer. And that's what I like about children. They didn't know anything about germs. And so evidently, their parents hadn't said anything to them about a mask and why people are out here wearing masks. That ought to be a person's right. If I want to wear my mask, I can wear it. If I don't want to wear my mask, I don't have to go to court and all this other kind of stuff. Talking about my constitutional rights, because yeah, you think your constitutional rights have been violated, but what about the constitutional rights of a whole lot of other people who were violated and they didn't have any rights at that time, so to say. And so I just sort of get angry. You help me, okay? But I just sort of get angry when we can take the smallest things to waste time over when we could be doing other things. The politicians need to be out here saying, okay, how can we help people? How can we get them back in jobs? How can we get the economy moving, all this kind of stuff? You're worried about trying to talk about some race theory when it's critical race theory. It happened and we can't erase that. I don't care how you look at it, what you say, what you can't tell a person what they can teach. If you're teaching history, it makes no difference one way or the other. This happened. We had to raise riots. We had to walk. You see it in the cameras and a lot of the kids don't understand. Even some of our Black kids don't understand. Well, why did they do that? Even some of the white kids trying to sit up and figure out, but this is my friend at school and we get along, but what was happening back then? So you got to go back a long ways and bring it forward before everybody can understand. But that's what hurts a lot of people. I don't want to go back because it might make me look bad. It might make my family look bad. It might make my grandchildren or my children say, well, did this really actually happen? And did great granddaddy actually do this? Whatever case might be. I don't know. So we just got a lot of things we got to work at, but it's hard to get to them because every time you think you made 1 or 2 steps forward, somebody wants to take back about 5 steps. And I'm going to cut it out right there because I can be saying.
Okay. You heard the gospel lesson for today. God does make the increase, okay? Right? So, yeah, and this is what the Emotional Emancipation Association of Black Psychologists are saying. It's like, this stuff has been going on for a long time. So we need to concentrate on what we can do and what we can do for our folk and help us to get healthy as much as possible. Because we can't worry about someone who sows in dishonesty. We can't worry about that. What is it? Our spirituality is what grounds us. And so holding on to our spirituality as we do the healing work and as we use our creativity to come up with solutions for our community and learning how to be in relationship with others, but knowing who we are in that relationship in a healthy way. God's gonna take care of that, the rest. And then there are people who are allies, who are wanting to do the work, and they are.
I would say to my friend Marilyn, my friend President Jimmy Carter told it best when he said, I was playing with the Black kids when my mom had to go do her work as a nurse. And then all of a sudden they wouldn't let me come out and play with them anymore. And I appreciate that because it lets you know that there is a healing, and he already knew it then when he was 11 years old. That needs to take place.
I'd like to say something, and my comment is something that was just recently in the news about the two boys that were in high school that had the fight at the mall, and the fact of how they were treated by the police officers, where, you know, they took the young white guy and sat him down and said, "Be quiet," and they put a knee, both of them, on the black young man, and then put him in handcuffs. The reaction of the white young man, I thought, was very heroic, because he stood up and said, and with holding his hands down, "Put handcuffs on me too then," because he determined that the kind of fight that they were having and what they were going through and dealing with did not justify them putting handcuffs on the young man. He was traumatized. You're talking about trauma, but he was traumatized as a result of being handcuffed, because he didn't think that it amounted to that either. But the other guy was saying, well, if you're going to put handcuffs on him, you need to put them on me as well. And that's the kind of thing that has to happen throughout society for any changes to be made, for any real reparations to happen.
Yeah. And we know what happens to our Black boys, particularly in this climate. And we need to pay attention to what's happening to our Black girls too, because they're being pushed out of the educational system into the into the juvenile justice system. And so then the question is, what is our response? Have we been paying attention to that? We know what's happening relevant, you know, to this cultural context in this country. I'll give you an example. So I went to New York, and my grandson, who is 21 years old, wanted to go to New York by himself just to explore, to ride the trains, because he loves MARTA, you know, in the trains, you know. There's no way, and he's 21 years old, I was going to let him be in New York by himself. You know, and so the question is, how then do we respond? I mean, we have plenty of anecdotes about what's happening. The question is, how then do we care for our children, our young adults, care for our elders? What's going on with our elders? Are we doing anything about, you know, what's happening with our elders and with ourselves? What about our own healing? You know, so you get angry again. The anger, what happens? Your blood pressure goes up, and you know, you're on medicine, and you go to the hospital, and all of that. How then do we address that? And then the question is, what is the role of the church, congregations, the communities? And are we doing anything, or are we just noting what's going on?
Right.
Well, one thing about the children, and Karen set a good example there. The children are more resilient than we think they are, and they're more understanding than we think they are. And
they're in the school system with adults who may not. And so how then do we prepare them?
That's true.
You know?
I mean, if the adult is there, and that's the person who they have to see every day, we got to start with them, but a lot of them may not admit things. And just like I say, everybody on the screen, I don't have a problem with, because all of them, we're all trying to search for the right answers together. There is no one right answer. It's a situation where we're just gonna have to work through it.
Yeah, and so atonement, those who were at atonement, come together, have a conversation about what one thing might you address? What one thing do you have the capacity to do to address one of the hurts, the ills of the community, whether it's around you or preferably around you. I'll ask the assistant to the bishop to respond to that. Or what's happening in the world. What one thing can you do?
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it's not your responsibility to do white people's work. We have to do our own work. But I think what Dr. Wallace is sharing with us today, the importance of the work to bring healing for your own self in that process, to hold up the mirror to your white friends, to say, you know, you've got to do this work. And, you know, we have to keep, as the church, having those opportunities to have conversation, but also to say that we don't have to continue in this path. And that's only going to happen if we're willing to do the work. If that's not your responsibility. And so, you know, you're on, you know, having this healing, having this opportunity to think about, you know, what has this done to your soul, generationally, and as it happens, you know, with the trauma that comes within our own communities, day after day. The only way that stops is to allow that healing to happen. And so, you know, I can't speak for all of the white people in the world, but we have to keep doing our work, and encourage, you know, the healing that needs to happen within all of our communities.
Pastor Bonner, you want to speak out what you wrote in the chat?
I just said, I forgot, someone made a comment about children. And often people say, oh, well, when our generation dies out, then the children who are more resilient, they won't be as racist. No, there are websites by people who are targeting 11-year-olds, filling them with racist sentiments and positioning them to be racist. I mentioned the 14 words, and this is in relationship, I believe, to the concerns around CRT, as you said earlier. It's really legal. It's a legal theory. It's not something that you teach kids in K through 12, but there's the thing called the 14 words, is we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. And so for me, I think CRT is connected to that slogan, the 14 words, which is a slogan mantra for white supremacists in this country. So they're connected. But what's also interesting to me, 1896, the United Daughters of the Confederacy were basically doing the same thing around how they wanted the Civil War to be presented, how they wanted the Confederacy to be presented, and how they restricted people who were giving the other side of what was going on during the Civil War, i.e. That it was a fight over slavery. So we are seeing some things occurring today that have occurred 100 plus some years ago. And one of the other things that's interesting about 1896, that's the same year as Plessy versus Ferguson, where you get, as Will Smith would say, instead of having equal protection under the laws, we got separate but equal, which we know was anything but equality.
Yes, go ahead, Pastor Beverly.
Just one quick thing. All of the things we've mentioned, yes, they have happened and they are occurring. But I thank you, Beverly, for making us understand that until we heal ourselves and until we see the trauma that is placed on us, then we don't have the resources to deal with these problems. What we do is we internalize them and move on. So that is the work on our part, is to understand that we have been traumatized, and what can we do to release ourselves from the bounds of that trauma that we suffered. And then we can push forward and say, what are we going to do about our critical race theory? What can we do about what goes on in our neighborhoods? So we realize the trauma we suffered and what it does to our children.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Wallace. We really appreciate this. All of the materials, the recording, will be made available to anyone that registered, as well as some of the resources that you mentioned. We'll also make those available and post them on our web pages so that people will have an opportunity to maybe purchase some of those books if they have an interest. I think, one other thing, there is a questionnaire that will be sent out to you we're interested in hearing your thoughts about this particular workshop. If you'd like to see more of this type of teachings, let us know, and we certainly will work hard to bring that to you. Okay. And with that, any other closing words, Dr. Wallace?
Thank you for having me. Again, I feel like I'm at home, even though I'm in the North Carolina Synod and teach in Minnesota and serve here in the Southeastern Synod. I do feel like I'm home. So thank you for receiving me.
I appreciate you for saying yes. I do. Okay. With that, we'll.
Are you ready for prayer, Melissa? You're muted.
Yes, please pray us out.
All right.
Thank you.
The peace of the Lord be with you all.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, thank you for the privilege of sharing this time together, a time to learn and to heal, a time to connect with each other spiritually, a time to reflect and breathe in the wonder of new knowledge learned. May what we have learned today have the impact on our spiritual selves so that we may be free of the trauma that can bind us. May we use what we have learned today to sustain our souls so that we may be what we have been created to be. Continue, O Creator, to watch over us as we continue to journey as people of God. In the name of He whose love emancipates us and heals us all. Amen.
Amen.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly.
You're welcome. Oh, that's you. Oh, thank you thank you, Beverly.
Look,
Oh,
I'm
yes.
so-
Thank you,
I'm so
Captain
used-
Shaw.
I'm so used to getting called Beverly Wallace that I just automatically answer. Yes. Oh, you're the new era of Chase Valley? No. Are you the one on Grief and Loss? No. Are you the one at Luther Seminary? No. I just naturally answer. Sorry.
Thank you, Beverly. That was wonderful.
Great. Thank you. I hope it was what you needed.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We
But let's
appreciate it.
talk about that abolitionist sanctuary work. Seriously.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.